Parliament and the Press Gallery Association chairperson to facilitate this engagement. Let me, from the onset, welcome and recognize the presence of the Secretary to Parliament, Mr. Claude George, the chairperson of the Press Gallery Association, Mayor Andiswe Makinana, the executive leadership of the PGA, as well as the membership, the rank and file. Only members in good standing are recognized. If you have not paid for your subscription, you are not recognized for now. And then also the Secretary to the National Assembly, Mr. Kaso, and the Secretary to the National Council of Provinces, Advocate Pindela, the members of the Parliament Management Team, you are welcome, as well as the staff. This is the first of, I hope, many engagements between the Secretary to Parliament, who is the accounting officer of the institution, and the membership of the Press Gallery Association that we regard as a very key stakeholder that we work with all the time, particularly around the State of the Nation address and the ongoing collaborations on a wide range of things to make Parliament work. The program is not very long. You can see it in front of you on the screens. It is very short, a welcome by myself, which is what I'm doing. The opening address by the Secretary to Parliament, and the questions from the PGA members, then followed by the vote of thanks from the chairperson of the PGA. So at this point, I'm going to ask the Secretary to Parliament and the chairperson of the PGA to join me in front and to occupy the seats that are behind me so that we can start with the engagement. Chairperson, Stalo, come in front, STP, middle seat. So I'm going then without any waste of time to invite the Secretary to Parliament to give opening remarks, and thereafter we will have some engagements with the members of the PGA. Thank you very much, STP.
It's not very loud. It's not loud enough.
Okay. I'm told that it is not loud enough, so can the technicians just try to increase the volume a little bit? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. A very warm welcome to all the members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery Association, able-led by the chairperson of the association, Ms. Makinana. I'm not sure when last did I see you. It was a long time ago.
It was a very long time ago.
Yeah. So I must have seen some of you in the parliamentary precinct and maybe greeted some of you. And I think in different engagements I've had at the Imbizo Center, some of you, I have no doubt you were present. and also with the collective that you are leading, the executive management or committee of the Press Gallery Association of Parliament, and to many esteemed members who are present from the media fraternity, as well as my colleagues from Parliament. Good morning to all of you. I think it is a privilege to have this moment, to have a conversation with yourselves right at this point in time, when our Parliament is almost 29 years and almost 4 months eating into the 30th year of a democratic Parliament of South Africa. And I happen to be given a responsibility right at the tail end to join this premier institution in our system of governance, to be able to lend a hand in our country's quest to improve our democratic project as a country right at its infancy stage. So I count myself privileged that I have been assigned a responsibility to also form part of this institution, so that I too can also learn and be able to join many of you who would have been part of this journey. Probably some of you in the association would have been part of it from the very first beginning, in the first 5 years, 94 to 99. And you would have many stories to share right at the foundational state of our democratic project as a country, as a new country, a new nation that has got massive aspirations to address many issues that have confronted the birth of a democracy in South Africa. I would also imagine many of you would have been part of the second parliament, others continuing, and maybe some of you would have been there right from 94 up until now. You have a cumulative experience of what this institution called Parliament is asked to do, is being called up on in our constitution to do, and playing your rightful role as the fourth estate, informing the public, informing the rest of society, but also being a watch into how things are being done in terms of processing the work of Parliament. So I've now been in office for about just more than 365 days. And we felt it important that let's have an engagement which is long overdue. I would have wanted it not to wait for 365 days, Chairperson, but possible, have it within the first 6 months. But learning how Parliament works, and also many issues that confront the institution immediately after the devastating impact of COVID, it becomes very, very difficult to have the time that otherwise you would definitely need and make available for regular engagement. What I would, however, commit to is to ensure that beyond this engagement, we maintain regular sessions and engagement with yourselves at a time that you will determine, and possible at a time that our communications team would like us to feedback on yourselves. You would no doubt recall what happened immediately after we had the devastating impact of the COVID pandemic and how disruptive it was to many institutions. So Parliament itself was not spared the time. The impact on its own operations and having to work under the most difficult conditions, given the significance and importance of its work to discharge its constitutional duties. But I'm quite pleased to say, as Secretary to Parliament, our Parliament proved its resilience to be able to make adaptation swiftly and be able to put up a business continuity plan that allowed it to operate like many other organizations off-site. But you can imagine the attendant challenges associated with that to perform oversight online and be able to exercise scrutiny over the executive online. That robs you a bit of time and contact on matters. But it was a moment to call for adaptation, to be able to conduct public hearings on promulgation of laws that were central to maintaining the disaster phase that we're all confronting on a health pandemic. And lawmaking by Parliament continued at that period. It continued at most. It even surpassed many times where, under the normal conditions, there were notable progress on many areas. So on the area that was quite impacted significantly would of course be physical interactions around public participation. But on the work of Parliament, its committees meeting, houses sitting, having plenaries that are online, and as the pandemic subsided relatively and be adjusted, then hybrid model also enabled Parliament to continue to function under those circumstances. And we're quite pleased that in our annual report, you will be able to see progress on the work of various committees of Parliament in terms of its own work and how we have supported the institution to ensure continuity, albeit under conditions that were not so ideal. So we have seen further, under the same year, the resumption of physical sittings in many of the plenaries of both houses, but also various committees that have sat and being provided with information that was very central to the functioning of those committees. So in short, we are quite pleased as Parliament that we continue to work under those conditions, building on what we believe would be the sustenance of a resilient institution as we progress towards the 7th Parliament. In the same period, as you would all recall, last year, we woke up early in January with a devastating fire that damaged the National Assembly, both the old wing and the new wing, quite extensively. And that on its own added a further element of disruption to Parliament, not only COVID adjustments that institutions were now enabled to adjust back. It became more devastating for Parliament to be faced with a fire that completely destroyed the National Assembly. And in the work of committees as well as offices of members, completely gutted those offices. So again, we were called upon to make adjustments quite significantly, to have off-site operations by Parliament, but also continue with hybrid enablement that we are still doing to date. We are still operating under those adjusted conditions, primarily now caused by space limitations, where we had X number of committees and we lost more than 15 committees that otherwise they would have been operating on a physical sitting. We, however, made some progress as at end of August last year, where we had the National Council of Provinces with the limited impact at the level of physical disruption, but at least at the level of technological impact, there was quick restoration and adjustments to that house. As a result, it is now able to function fully at a full sitting. However, members have also felt important that they would like to continue operating on a hybrid basis on certain matters, but on certain matters, they are able to convene and meet physically as the House. Something that the National Assembly had to make some partial adjustments using sittings at the Good Hope Chamber, albeit at a limited scale, because you can't take more than 130 people sitting. So you will be able to continue functioning at the level of hybrid sitting. Some committees are able to meet, and we have started work now around rebuilding and restoration of Parliament. And thanks to the work that we have done supporting the Executive Authority of Parliament, putting up a formidable case to the National Fiscus to be able to allocate resources to rebuild Parliament. And we received, as you may be aware, given our number of reports we take to the Joint Standing Committee, reporting plans to rebuild Parliament. And on those plans that we are rebuilding Parliament on, we have been able to secure an amount of about 2 billion rand to start the restoration work on the damaged building. And we received the allocation on the 27th of October last year, and the actual appropriation early this year in terms of confirmation to our budget. That enabled us, as at March, to be able to appoint an implementation principal agent to be able to take charge of the restoration work. And we appointed the Development Bank of Southern Africa to undertake this work. Massive work that needed to be done. As you all know, we reported to various governing structures of Parliament what is the plan for restoration of Parliament and what are the associated implications to make adjustments. And we're quite pleased that we've been able to do that, at least by quantifying the extent of the damage that disrupted sittings, the extent of the damage that disrupted office space for members, the extent of the damage that disrupted committee room availability, the sharing model that committees are used, but also continuation of the hybrid model. So we've started that work now. We've started that work and we're quite pleased on the progress that we have put in place since we started with the preparatory work around the restoration. Most importantly, the office members that were disrupted, offices of members rather, quite a number of offices that were extensively damaged, more than 284 offices. But at least at the start, we're able to identify within our own facilities 90 Plain Street, where we made adjustment to move our staff to continue working from home and be able to do hot desking in other offices so that we can yield space in the 4th and 5th floor to do refurbishment for about 155 offices for members. That work is continuing at pace, and we're quite pleased that we will be able to complete that work at the end of August, to have 155 offices for members, which is much needed for members to be able to come on board and start their physical presence in a much more conducive working environment. So that's one of the major progress areas that members have been yearning for: restoration of office space. We, however, still need to secure additional office space for other members. So whilst we are busy with the restoration project, we are able to provide for members to continue working. NCOP members, their own offices are in full operation. So it is about additional members that we need to do for members of the National Assembly. So we're quite pleased on that area of work, on the provisioning of offices for members. We are currently in a discussion with Public Works as the state landlord to yield additional floors of the offices that we have at 90 Plain Street. We have identified additional offices from the 6th floor to the 14th floor. And we think if we were to secure that space, it would give us much needed space to bring back a number of officials to come back to the precinct. At the same time, secure additional offices that are outstanding for members. The discussion with Public Works are fairly advanced. They have reached a stage where at the executive level with the minister, we have now concluded the discussion that those offices must be released for Parliament to be able to utilize. What we are waiting for is formal communication to deal with the attendant disruptions for their offices. As we might know, some of the members, chairperson, might know that the multi-tenancy system that Parliament is co-sharing with many departments and the executive has proven quite a challenge in terms of Parliament maximizing its office space. So we think that if those offices are released, it will help us a great deal to attend to the issues that the members require of us. They have a deeds office there that has got massive space requirements for their registry, for filing and other things, and we're in discussion with them to identify space outside Parliament that would allow them to have a smooth transition to move out. And that would help us quite a lot to restore functionality and space presence for members. On the functioning of Houses of Parliament, on major events, as you might know, adjustment had to be made as far back as 2022, having the first sauna off-site at the City Hall. We continued this year, utilizing the City Hall to be able to convene full sittings of joint houses, again on conditions that are not so ideal. But that is the most practical way we can be able to do that work at this point in time. So we are assessing as we go forward, how do we continue? Because as we approach next year, you would know it's not only a period of the transition towards 7th Parliament, it also poses tricky challenges, because in 1 year you will have to attend to a very detailed plan to host 2 official openings of Parliament, State of the Nation, which is usually done in February. But as you will know, immediately after election, you would also be faced with the second sauna that would take place immediately after that. So a quite of logistical planning with precision for full seating is continuing ahead in our plans to make sure that we are able to prepare not only for the state of the nation, but also to prepare to transition the current members of the Sixth Parliament and usher in new members, including responsibilities around induction, orienting members, but attending to all matters that make them to be fully accommodated. So as the administration of Parliament, we are busy with preparing that kind of work. On the area of restoration, yesterday we woke up with chilling headlines on City Press that Parliament remains in ruins 18 months after a devastating fire. So essentially communicating a message that all is doom. And if we don't express our disappointment at that, it will be an understatement. Because it seems to communicate a message that notwithstanding the actual urgency within which Parliament is prosecuting the work of reconstruction at a much more faster pace than it is, a minor delay of a month to remove rubble gets elevated to a stage where it attracts national headlines, almost communicating a message that there is information gap, there is no communication around this matter, and things are almost like falling apart, threatening the actual completion of the work. And as Parliament, I would imagine many of you in the gallery, you do attend Joint Standing Committee. You also attend various other fora we account to, the Chief Whip's fora, the multi-party committees where we provide regular updates, as most recent as at May, where we are around this work. So we're quite confident that as we reconstruct Parliament, we are mindful of attended issues that happened at a site level. Because in any conditions that you do, you'll encounter many challenges at the level of estimates of your outline, but also right at the level of actual site conditions that prevail. Indeed, we plan to start in June 20 to remove rubble and plan to complete by end of July. And right at the start of that process, you can only proceed on the basis of detailed technical assessment by structural engineers that are very central to determine a building where the report says the extensive damage on the new wing and the old assembly has been so massive such that the structural integrity of the building was compromised in many areas. So to be able to handle multiple attendant processes, you are facing Auditor General that says, we want to see your assets that are there as part of your financial statements. So you can't give us an impairment and say, you assume that on the basis of the damage, those assets are ruined, so therefore impair them. They will remind you of GREP standards. GREP so-and-so, we actually want physical verification. Physical verification entails going through the building. And going through the building means navigating space underground where heritage assets are, and physically identify if the office chair is there, the desk is there, its coding is still recognizable, and so on. So a careful examination of structural condition determining pathways was very central for us to be able to do that work. And that work indeed was done. As it was done, true to any condition of extensive damage, you will be able to find that certain areas where you can allow people to further go down, there's other conditions on the ground. Water ingress penetrating many areas, and the site condition changes almost every week. because you also have inclement weather. You've got wide open roof that changes those conditions. So determining water levels at a particular time and what it does on the base erosion is a very critical issue for technical people that would be able to guide where can we assess, where can we not assess, to be able to remove the rubble. Those conditions materialize. The declining oxygen level became a central condition that even if you were to allow people to get in there, you need oxygen to be able to undertake that work. Those are conditions that in any situation of a site discovery become additional to what would normally be your plan to get in there. Well, an easy question is going to arise, did you not anticipate that work? Any of that work gets anticipated, but as you discover conditions on the ground, they change all the time. I would imagine many of you, Chairperson, would have been very central to witness the reconstruction, not reconstruction, the construction of How Train. You would imagine at the time it was built, 72 months to finish the line, starting from this period, from Pretoria right up until Park Station, Sentin Marlborough line, Rosefield up to the airport. And by the time you get to Rosebank, your plan would say we would finish this in 8 months to be able to dig under. And you discover conditions that otherwise in your geo sequencing assessment, you would not have anticipated water gushing. If not, you get to Bramfontein, there is now huge rock that might have geological artifacts that are of a heritage nature. Secure an expert to determine that, wait a bit. And I think in the removal of the rubble that we planned for a month, we too face those conditions. A different scenario may also arise, ticking on it immediately. We go in, remove rubble, other things happened, or we move in haste so that we tick the box that we have done it. We do what everybody is looking forward to, correctly so, to start seeing cranes building. We build, and somewhere down the line when we have to finish the work, you discover conditions that threaten the very existence of the new structures of Parliament. I'm sure we will also not escape the same headlines. How did they go ahead without satisfying themselves that the technical conditions actually warrant that they must proceed? No, we were under pressure for 24 months. But you now result in a disaster. Members, the building caves in, and there's a human disaster. We too will not survive that kind of embarrassing situation. So admittedly, we will face those difficulties as we plan, but we remain steadfast to complete our work, so that we don't only focus on one dimension that would be occasioned at different stages of construction, and not look at the actual progress that is likely to be realized, including much needed work to restore presence of members back to the precinct. So we're quite pleased from where we are. At the same time, we're not going to rest on our laurels. We want to remain committed to the period of completing this work in the timeline that we have communicated. In the timelines that we have completed, that by end of November, the restoration of Parliament in 2025 must be completed. And we will be committed to achieving all of that. One of the other issues that we thought would be very important for us will be to also ensure that the multi-pronged nature of our restoration work also seizes the moment to correct historical constraints that Parliament faced in buildings of a historical nature that had their own constraints that could not anticipate growth of Parliament. I'm sure many of the members of the gallery would know that every time there's sauna, in the new wing of the National Assembly, the seating had to be augmented to go and physically remove chairs from another house, augment the space seating. So part of the work we want to do in the redesign process is also to ensure that we address those space constraints. Secondly, drive a balance between historical heritage, nature of the building in terms of the Heritage Act, but also innovate to respond to some of the constraints that were there before. And one of those is around space. The second issue is around of occupational health standards that have been very difficult to be able to comply with in a building that is historical pre-advent of those legal requirements. But also deal with issues that the previous reports of Parliament pointed out to the desire to create our precinct to be much more functional, to create functional linkage of our buildings. So part of the work we'll be doing will be to make sure that we are able to connect the buildings that exist, maximize space utilization, but also ensure that the facility itself is user-friendly, its barriers to people with disabilities is addressed fully, and create a functional space. So we want to address that as we attend to restoration, but respond to the structural limitation. So it's going to be quite an exciting project that we would like to co-journey with yourselves at different stages, like the first time that the Speaker led you into the National Assembly at the time that we got technical determination that at least access can be given. So we would like to co-journey with yourselves as the media so that you could help us in the process. So the functional use of the entire precinct to be one of those. The second part is what I've already covered on the office space requirements for members and committees. And the third space is around redesigning the outlook in such a way that if there were no any other limitation, we would pose a fundamental question to South Africans. What should a post-democratic parliament look like? If you were to be given a chance to influence the design process, which we will be starting now in July, the redesign process, how do we galvanize a cross-section of society to buy into that work in such a way that we could be able to imbue the rich cultural tapestry of our country to influence how a post-democratic parliament should look like, what values should it communicate, and so on. And I think we will count on yourself to help us to generate massive interest to society, because this reconstruction can never be about Parliament itself as an institution rebuilding, but it has to be a project that correctly affords South Africans to influence it. And we're quite determined that we want to do that. And your guidance and advice would help us a great deal to say to students in our universities, to heritage architects, to space designers, what should a parliament, using this moment, that would have been quite unfortunate moment, but to be able to say, this parliament represents all of us. And this is what it carries to all the richness of our country in terms of the multiple cultures that we all have. So we would like to work with yourselves around the reconstruction project as we start the redesign work. But we wouldn't want a message of gloom to overwhelm what otherwise is a very positive project of reconstruction that will not be easy, but its long enduring impact will require us to carefully and steadily move, addressing any limitations that we have. We are also looking at issues of facilities management as part of this work. And that entails us working on the current arrangements that we operate under. I think many of you in the media fraternity, you would also know that all the state's immovable assets fall under one state department called Public Works. And Parliament is desirous to have a responsibility to manage its own assets. so that it is able to plan properly, maintain them regularly and timely, and be able to make sure that all the corresponding tools to manage assets and account are within the hands of Parliament. And that has been more compounded and made more real by the advent of the legislation that governs financial management of Parliament, the Financial Management of Parliament and Provincial Legislatures Act. And this legislation also coexists with the Government's Immovable Property and Infrastructure Management Act, GIAMA. And we have to look also at the legislation that empowers Parliament to be able to take charge of its own precincts and what happens in a precinct. So we think that there's room for reviewal of those pieces of legislation so that we enable a much more complementary legal framework that asserts the centrality of Parliament to manage its own assets and respond. So we think that during this process of reconstruction, no doubt we will be able to take a careful examination of some of these legislation to make sure that Parliament is able to manage its assets and be able to maintain them in a manner that accords with the requirements of the Financial Management of Parliament Act, including historical legislations that were central to managing parliamentary villages, the Village Management Act that exists, that requires revisiting around those matters. So as we process our work towards the 7th Parliament transition, we will be working closely with Public Works to make sure that Parliament takes full custody of its own assets and manages it properly. On the area of financial governance and accountability, I also want to share with the members of the association, Madam Chairperson, that Parliament is steadfast on managing its own accountability, is steadfast on championing good governance and leading transparently on how it handles its own financial affairs. And will continue to strive for that. We are quite pleased to report that Parliament for the 9th consecutive year has received a clean audit from the Auditor General of South Africa. So at it too is not ambiguous in holding us accountable. At the level of various departments it oversees, it actually continues to lead by example. And we would like to continue doing that work and be able to make sure that even our own assets we are able to maintain and manage in a manner that responds to those areas. On the area of implementation of the work of Parliament implementing state capture recommendations, we are quite pleased that the presiding officers of Parliament, as recent as last month, did have an engagement to outline progress with many of you that were present in that session, to outline progress of Parliament on what it has done at the time of receiving the report that was tabled by His Excellency the President to Parliament on the 24th of October last year. And Parliament went in motion to put processes in place to make sure that relevant committees are able to process the full recommendations of state capture, those that pertain to Parliament, as well as those that pertain to the executive and other arms of the state. For Parliament, there were about 19 recommendations that pertain to Parliament, and Parliament did report that out of those, 11 of them have been implemented by Parliament. The other 8 are in progress of being implemented, processed by various committees, and such committees being held accountable for regularly reporting back on those committees. So we're quite pleased that progress has been done, and Parliament also had an opportunity to engage with the Chief Justice to outline progress made and also areas of collaboration with various arms of the state in terms of its stated commitment that it will continue to implement these recommendations and it will continue to report publicly on how far it is implementing those recommendations. What we have done on the side of the Administration of Parliament is to make sure that we support the committees in terms of key issues raised. I'm sure many of you in the media, you will recall that one of the key issues raised in those recommendations was that the oversight of Parliament, its oversight work needs to be strengthened. The committees need to be adequately resourced to perform their own work. And we have started to move in speed by capacitating those committees in terms of the administrative content advisors that we have appointed, additional content advisors, 4 additional ones we have appointed. We're in the process of concluding appointments of legal advisors, about 4 legal advisors, but also about 8 researchers, to make sure that the committees of Parliament receive maximum support to be able to play their role. We have also allocated an additional 58 million rand in the appropriation of Parliament that it has received. And that work is looking at the transformative work that we want to do that underpins the macro strategy framework of Parliament. And one of the areas that we are looking at is to make sure that Parliament must be able to play its role, building on various areas, whether it's laws that have been challenged successfully, to say, Parliament, review this act. You have not been able to do better public participation, to meaningfully engage citizens. In other areas, they would have made a finding courts around how we perform oversight. So in our own interpretation of that work, we are looking at requisite capacities of Parliament to ensure that its committees receive much needed data-driven insights to perform oversight. So that oversight is yielding to positive shifts on how the executive implement its work. Better scrutiny by members, but also to look at areas where the implementation of the medium-term strategic framework and priorities that have been set for the country, our committees must be geared to move in the direction of discharging their responsibilities to perform oversight that is linked to development outcomes. So we are working on a macro strategy framework as Parliament, which we have started extensive work since November last year to redesign how the 7th Parliament, in our view, should look at its work consistent with the core mandates of Parliament. But in the main, looking at how does Parliament track progress around attainment of national development goals. What are the priorities that have been set, and how do we know if the country is moving in that direction as Parliament of the people? So our macro strategy framework will be located within the pillars of outcomes and impacts. So we're busy working on areas around remodeling our administration to build the requisite capacities so that data-driven oversight becomes the hallmark of our work going forward. Building intelligent capability to make sure that oversight is not only discovered after the fact, it also points out areas where there must be intervention so that at the level of contact with the executive, Parliament is ahead of the game. It's able to say, we have looked at your APP, we have looked at your priorities, we think there's a disconnect, or the outline of your core targets are unlikely to be realized because the following modeling from our side says that. So we're investing heavily on that area to make sure that we shift the paradigm towards outcomes and impact. Track down the social development indicators of the country, track down the human development indicators of the country, but look at the macro direction, economic direction, as well as areas of equity and inclusion given our development contradiction as a country. So we believe that the refreshed perspective around our macro strategy will go a long way in ensuring that the completion of 30 years of democracy, our parliament becomes that instrument that is centered around being a transformative parliament, a parliament that looks at driving a responsive approach by the state, but also a parliament that responds directly to the issues raised by the people. So we're quite excited about our macro strategy, that it will be centered around those areas to position parliament as a transformative instrument at the hands of the people, to be able to intervene decisively using its constitutional powers, but driven directly by data insights that must help its work. So that's one of the areas that we are quite excited as we go forward. On the area of international relations, we are quite pleased that Parliament, consistent with the sixth Parliament strategy, has continued to deepen parliamentary diplomacy by deepening its work, building relations with various multilateral bodies within the SADC region. We are playing a critical role around SADC Parliament, but also playing a role with many other international bodies, the International Parliamentary Union, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, but also various committees in terms of international relations at the level of United Nations, the various committees that parliaments have a role to interact with. So we're quite pleased that a number of treaties have been signed by Parliament, most recently about 7 treaties that looks to create even the SADC Parliament, as well as various areas that speaks to areas of trade, as well as other protocols. So there's steady progress around that area. And most important, as we all know that in August, the heads of states will be convening a BRICS summit hosted by our own country, where South Africa will be assuming the role of BRICS chairmanship in August. We too, as Parliament, there will be a BRICS Parliamentary Forum scheduled for the 26th to the 28th of September that will be hosting a number of BRICS players. We are expecting to host about 200 members of BRICS in South Africa, supported by their personnel, to be able to look at BRICS ushering a theme of Africa and BRICS, how to deepen relations, but also look at the area of strengthening within Africa our participation in the Africa Free Trade Agreement. What's the role of Parliament to create enabling legislation and legal instruments that must support that work? So we're quite excited that our work is moving ahead for our Parliament to play host to other presiding officers of BRICS and other members that are aspirant BRICS members that would have expressed an interest. We will be convening such a forum in Johannesburg on the 26th to the 28th of September this year. Lastly, on the area of our work towards consolidating Parliament, strengthening stability and relations, we are quite pleased that we are seized with the work of strengthening the labor relations in the sector, the employer-employee relations, that I have no doubt many of you would have noticed that it has been fraught with many difficulties in the past. So over the last year, we have started rebuilding some of the difficulties that have characterized relations between employer and in particular ourselves as Parliament. We're quite pleased that there's green shoots of stabilization that are emerging, that we believe that we need to build on them and strengthen our relations between employer and employees, but most importantly for the sector. You would have noticed that every year employers in the legislative sector, employers would have to engage labor in the main employee body, labor being NEHAW. By the time you finish this year, you must start another round of negotiation when you start annually. for the first time, Parliament has led a process to bring what we regard as a groundbreaking agreement, a 3-year, multi-year wage agreement in the sector, which we have no doubt it will give us much needed relief to ensure that there's labor, peace, stability in the sector. We are able to allow legislatures across provinces to plan predictable around budgets that know that for employee related implications of salary adjustments and condition of service, this is the budget, unlike in the past. So this is groundbreaking because for the first time that we were able to reach that. Don't ask us how we do that, but we have been able to reach that stage where we have been able to bring to bear in our conversation the co-creation of a future that employees needs to also bring an employee value proposition when the employer must too bring on the table an employer value proposition that responds to issues of equity, justice, and fairness, and allow the policy framework that governs employer relations to be fundamentally reviewed to make sure that we don't have unending grievance on those matters. So we're quite pleased as Parliament around this matter. On the move towards 7th Parliament, we're quite pleased we have processes in place that would help us lead to that process of a full transition that we anticipate once the date of elections is set. It kicks in for us a constitutionally compliant program that we need to move by a certain period. Within 14 days, this must happen. Legislatures must complete, the National Assembly must sit, NCOP must sit. How do we deal with members? So we're quite pleased around our readiness within this period of our tenure in Parliament. That stability is the hallmark of what we want to see. At the same time, elevate the conversation to deal directly with issues affecting the people and ensuring that Parliament sharpens its approach to examine laws that must drive the socio-economic development impact that we want to see our country, but also re-examine its instruments for oversight to make sure that the necessary potency on oversights is translatable into positive experiences on the lived realities of our people. And that's the summary that I thought I would share with you. And you would also be aware that on the issues around the fire and other matters, we indicated to the press gallery at the last time we met at the Imbizo, there were investigations done on the fire and related matters. And we said at the time when we are ready to communicate that we will be able to communicate those matters with yourselves once we have done all the internal processes that relate to what happened and how to respond to what we characterized as vulnerabilities that have led to this situation. But we will be able to communicate to yourselves to make sure that we can keep you informed and also update you on what are the corresponding actions to strengthen the work of Parliament around strengthening areas that we think we're vulnerable on. Otherwise, Chairperson, we're quite happy where we are, and thank you very much for allowing me the opening remarks.
Thank you very much. If I can just have my lapel activated, I just want us to relax. This is not a press briefing. It is an engagement between the accounting officer and the Press Gallery Association, just to few seconds to have the podium removed so that we can engage eyeball to eyeball. Thank you very much, STP. It's quite a very comprehensive but high-level summary. Because you can imagine that the work of more than 365 days in office, especially following the vacancy with regard to that position for 5 years. So it's quite a lot of work. But the STP has done its best to ensure that we give a very high level but be comprehensive at the same time. So I'm just going to take one by one. Whoever is ready, just raise your hand from members of the Press Gallery Association. We would also, the STP is accompanied by the members of the management team as well as the two secretaries from the both houses of Parliament, who, as and when they are required to clarify on some of the issues, they will be called to do so. Please shoot, Linda.
Yes, Secretary, I understand what you're saying.
There is also a roving mic, so just so that you can be heard by everyone.
Yes, Linda Ensel from Business Day. I understand what you're saying, Secretary, about the delay in the restoration of Parliament. But don't you think that there is some validity to the criticism that it's taken 18 months for you to get to the stage where you're assessing the structural weaknesses? I mean, why only start now? Why couldn't have all this work have been done last year? Thank you.
STP, we're just going to take one by one. And did you want to take yes? Okay. We'll take the first round and then, yeah.
Good morning. Thank you, SDP. Lindsay Dentlinger, Eyewitness News. I just want to get clarity. Are you saying you're not at this occasion prepared to share what the findings are of that internal investigation? I mean, it's well over a year, I think, since you started it. And then just linked to that, if you can just provide us with clarity, the Deputy Secretary to Parliament at the time was suspended. What is the status of her employment at this time? And if you are able to share details about the fire investigation, can you at least give us some indication, were there shortcomings on Parliament's side, whether that was occupational health and safety or security lapses? Can you give us any indication whether there was some kind of culpability on Parliament's side for that fire? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question for the first round? The chairperson of the PGA. Now I understand why you wanted me to facilitate. Because you wanted to participate as well.
A journalist will
Go ahead.
I don't know if you can hear me. Yes. Yeah, okay. Mine is more of an in-house question, Chairperson. With the space limitations in Parliament, you know that we are literally housed by Parliament as the PGA. Our offices are at 100 Blaine Street. We know that you're looking for space. Are we in any way going to be affected as the PGA? We've been wondering if we'll still be able to keep our offices.
Okay, I think that STB will constitute the first round. We will make a determination if there is still appetite for the next round, for the second round, but...
Let's take another one.
Is there any other? Oh, sorry, I missed you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Jason Felix from News 24. Just on the question on the restoration of the National Assembly. Sorry about that. How confident are you of this November 2025 date that you've given us, given the fact that you've also given us that there's construction delays and there are the delays that you're currently facing as well? So how confident are you of November 2025? Will we be sitting in a new National Assembly building?
Okay. Any other? I don't want to miss any other. You want to come? Okay.
Good afternoon, Secretary. Llewellyn Prince of Netwerk 24. Just in terms of oversight, you said that there are major plans to strengthen Parliament's oversight role, especially in the build-up to the 7th Parliament. I just want to find out, are there any plans for the immediate time frame that we're in leading up to the elections? Are there plans to strengthen oversight also? Or what are the immediate plans to strengthen it? Thank you.
Okay. Any other hand for the first round? Okay, I don't see any other hand. STP?
Okay. No, thank you very much, colleagues. On the 5 questions. On the first one from Linda, is there any validity in the criticism that Parliament took more than 18 months to begin to assess its work and start with the reconstruction project? Criticism is always welcome, and I think it helps us to remain focused and be able to attend to areas of work that otherwise we may have been blind-sided on. But in this case, it will be technically misplaced to characterize it as criticism that is earned or whatever, deserved, so to speak. Because you will recall that by the 3rd of January 2022, when the buildings were razed down and the fire started to be under full control, immediately the site became a site of crime. And there are protocols that relate to investigation of sites of crime. Who is eligible to access such a site that has been cordoned off, that is now handed over to law enforcement agencies? And Parliament itself, because it was a site of crime, law enforcement agencies, the Hawks, had taken charge of the site. And they did their own investigation up to a certain period. And that period only ran up until July 2022, when they officially communicated to Parliament that a site can now be accessible around what they did as their investigation. However, work was then allowed around March for 2-phased investigation that were done by Public Works, a preliminary assessment and a subsequent detailed assessment of the damage. And they appointed Kucha Development Corporation to do that work, gave a preliminary, given further scope of work to determine the damage and quantify the impact of the loss. Around May, they completed that work. And by the time it was reported to our committees subsequently in June and July, we immediately started our own work in terms of looking at those reports, looking at the extent of the damage, but also understanding the cost implications on the options given on the report. And once we understood that, it also coincided with us to trigger engagement with the fiscal budgeting process of our country by presenting proposals to National Treasury. We need allocation, and that time was timely for us in the sense that the budget was running, and there's always a window in the budgeting period called the medium-term expenditure framework policy statement that is done usually around October. And we're quite pleased that we're able to persuade presiding officers meeting with the Ministry of Finance in September, and in October, an allocation of 2 billion rand was made available. And recognizing that this is for restoration based on estimate, we also quantified what we regarded as disruptive influence for the work of Parliament, for it to have business continuity. The impact on the infrastructure, broadcasting infrastructure, the impact of offices, and the off-site engagements in the City Hall, and related other sites that committees have to hire, hotels and so on, to be able to meet physically when they have to. So we then quantified further allocation we needed. We were given 118 million rand in the appropriation, and we were able to start working. As I've indicated, we are busy with the office reconstruction of about 155 offices, but also to be able to hire broadcasting infrastructure that is very necessary for off-site operations. I think many of you would know that Parliament invested heavily on the National Assembly that existed pre-fire, and to be able to go and hire broadcasting outdoor facilities is quite massive. So we had to get additional resources around that. And only when funds are allocated that you can proceed, we started our work to identify our own capabilities as Parliament. Will we be able to do a project of this massive scale? Do we have internal capabilities to do that? And we recognize that we don't have that. So we've got to look at what best can we do within the state capabilities. And we identified the Development Bank of Southern Africa. That is a massive infrastructure agent for various state departments to implement this project. And we have no doubt about their capabilities. They've got proven track record of a portfolio that they have done. So to see them on the headlines, DPSA is unable to do this, in a screaming headline, it was a bit concerning to us. But we're quite confident that their own capacities will be able to implement this project. So yes, from where we stand, we think that the criticism will be unfounded, because the only time we got in charge of the site is when we handed over the site. And even to start that, we can then start on the base of a fiscal response to be able to get technical engineers to determine pathways, where can we assess. And they have to do that work within 6 weeks that we gave them from March, when we handed over the site on the 6th of March, to be able to determine, at the same time dealing with the twinning requirement, that AG is on us in a period of audit, and they require a massive issue, which is about asset register, the integrity of your asset register. If you don't do that, you invite immediate area of disclaimer because of the lack of completeness of your asset register. So yes, we started around March to access the site. So removal of rubble, hoarding of the building are all part of the phase preparatory work. So a detailed design can then take place up until end of September to be able to do detailed design. And our plan is still to make sure that come January next year, the contractor is on site to start the brick and mortar work of Parliament. So we do think that it would have been difficult for us to access the site. So the 18 months must also not only draw reference to South Africans about 18 months of the fire. The actual start of the work had to go through different stages to allow law enforcement to take charge of the site when it is handed over officially and be able to start doing their work. So essentially, we are less than 4 months being on that site. So the 18 months is irreconcilable with the time it took to be resourced to do the work. The second part is on the eyewitness news. I think Lindsay, the Deputy Secretary, was suspended. What is the status of her employment? Yes, indeed, that happened in October 28. And as of now, the Deputy Secretary is no longer an employee of Parliament. And she has retired. Her contract of employment ended on the 31 of May. It also coincided with her retirement period. And she is no longer an employee of Parliament. Are you able to share with us whether there were any grounds for culpability on the fire and other areas? I think we did indicate that the reports did point out a number of vulnerabilities, which we think a detailed response about reporting on the work, we would like to do that at an appropriate time when we have done quality assurances. As you know, any process that you do, you need to make sure that all your assessment is in order to be able to define what are the subsequent steps pertaining to that process. So we are seized with that phase now, and we will definitely determine a date where Parliament will be able to communicate that work. Secondly, Chair of the Press Association, will there still be offices to accommodate you? I think you are partners in this journey, and we are identifying what needs to be done around redesigning space in the precinct, and how we must make sure that we balance all the various needs of offices. And I think we will engage with you from time to time to make sure that Parliament remains conducive to transparent reporting on its work. Jason, are we confident that November 2025 will be met as a target to finish the work? We remain optimistic and confident for that work. Bar anything else, we do not know. And we are unable to know it now because of what will arise out of detailed design. Detailed design will tell us, responding to balancing two dimensions of the restoration work, maintaining the heritage outlook that is necessary in terms of legislation, responding to the needs of a democratic parliament whose needs are much more expansive than the current makeshift arrangements we have. It might, arising out of the detailed design, warrant more work to be done in terms of the timelines. But we are not saying we think there will be that, but there will be issues arising out of detailed design where they will be able to give us implementation plan that speaks to every element that requires responsiveness. You can imagine buildings that are as ancient as 1630 something, some of the areas. What happens to the underground piping system? What happens to many areas that otherwise might require that you think you are focusing on the new wing and old wing, but the piping networks requires extensive work underground. It touches on the buildings that were not part of that. So the detailed design would tell us what will be the massive disruption to the entire precinct of Parliament, given the network connectivity that we are not sited on. So the issue may not be the site itself, where the fire, it might be the impact of the disruption into the entire precinct. And invariable, that might borrow an additional month or months to be able to say, in the midst of restoration, you are also responding to otherwise what would have been long-term response to create an ideal setting in Parliament. So the jury is still out there, but our commitment is that by the period we set, November 25, we would like to see the contractor sticking to that and being held accountable for that. The question on the strengthening oversight as of now and 2024, I did outline the area of work around supporting the capacity, the technical capacity to assist the committees by strengthening our content area of support, strengthening our research, bringing additional capacity on legal services, but also planning to invest on the building of a data modeling for Parliament. So by the time we get to the 7th Parliament, there's better capacities that are central to supporting the oversight. So yes, they are currently being supported, and we'll be able to roll out more based on a comprehensive operating model that will arise out of the high-level design we're busy with as Parliament.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, STP. I see, Linda, you are very much anxious for this, in a very intimidating manner, for that matter. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Secretary, I don't know whether you've got the figures, but what have been the savings to Parliament due to the hybrid system in terms of catering and air tickets? Because many MPs are not coming to Cape Town. And then also, what is the budget, if you've got the figure for the virtual hearings? Is it very costly? If you could just elaborate on that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Wendell. Yeah. Secretary, just 2 points of clarity, please. On the media, so if my understanding is correctly, we will be accommodated, and there's nothing to worry about. And secondly, just on the asset register and the AG, does that asset register include all of the artworks that were housed, or is that a separate sort of process altogether, or are those also considered to be part of the asset register of Parliament? And if there are any other details around the artworks and you know what sort of impact the fires had on them, any details on that, be greatly appreciated. Okay.
Okay. Third one. I see the chairperson wants to go.
Yeah. Sorry, STP. In March, you pledged that. You pledged that you would appoint the head of security. I think by March. Have you appointed somebody? And I would like to follow up on this design of the new parliament and the call that you're making on South Africans maybe to take part in what the post-democratic parliament should look like. Are you making that call, and who are you making the call to? And is this like practically something that you would be doing as with DBSA to call on the people to decide what parliament should look like? Is it part of the process that now you are working on? And on the contractors that will be doing the actual rebuilding of parliament, who is appointing those? Is that all left out to DBSA? Will there be a public process where there's ads and companies can apply to do the actual work? Thanks.
Secretary Aisha Ismail from ENCA. We often hear members of parliament complaining about the conditions in the parliamentary villages. Now you speak of possibly taking over and the running of these parliamentary villages. Is it your intention to increase their rental and the service fees that they're paying at the moment? Because right now they're paying a mere pittance.
Okay.
Secretary Lindsay again. On the Section 194 inquiry that is wrapping up, some political parties say Parliament has not played open cards about what the evidence leaders have been paid, and that the focus has purely been on the legal fees that is being paid from the Public Protector's Office. Can you just clarify, are the evidence leaders being paid from parliamentary budget, and if you're able to share, what are they being paid? If you're not able to share what they are being paid, can you give us an indication? Surely this must be running way out of what Parliament ever budgets to pay for legal services. I know this is a novel process and you haven't had to deal with something like this before, but just as the PPSA's office has been running out of money, surely this can't, if it is so, that the evidence leaders are purely being paid by Parliament, that this is surely something you didn't budget for to run on and to employ top advocates for a year.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. Any other hand for the second round? I think we can agree that this is the last round, Chairperson.
Let's see. We may have follow-up questions.
That's why I want to give everyone an opportunity so that we don't miss anyone. I don't see any other hand. Okay. We'll make a determination after this if there is any strong argument for the third round.
Okay.
STP?
No, thank you very much. You would have noticed when I started my opening remarks, I acknowledge everyone. They are my colleagues here who know the rands and cents of what we have saved. So I saw them scratching their heads, cracking their skulls. They might know how much we have realized on a saving on the 2021-22 budget arising out of COVID lockdown. But what I do know is that on the one hand, in the cost driver composition in any budget, you would find that on a certain aspect of physical sitting movements of members, you would have realized a saving. On the ICT and connectivity, it will then shoot up on the one area. And then you have got your sunk costs that will not change. Even if people are sitting at home, you still have to pay them, pay their members and other things. So invariably, the composition of the budget spent would point out realized savings, which at least at the level of Parliament, in terms of our legislation, we are allowed to retain funds to be able to deploy them in subsequent budget year. We don't return them to the fiscus. So I would ask them to share that response. The second issue is on the head of security, Chairperson. Yes, we did say in March we were in the process, and the last time we engaged with you in May, in June rather, 12, we did say that we have recently appointed the Chief Financial Officer, and there were two key positions that were critical and vacant, and that was the Chief Financial Officer and the Chief of Security, which we had to remodel the capacity that we need given the vulnerabilities I've highlighted. We envisaged that by March that would have been done, and it has been quite difficult for us to get a candidate. We had to go headhunting, look at follow-ups, and we are optimistic that we are almost close at the tail end of a process to identify a Chief of Security for Parliament. So we envisage that at least by September, we should have a person in place to assume the role of Head of Security for Parliament. On the area of redesign for Parliament, how do we envisage engaging South Africans? As we say, this is not a project for Parliament itself. No doubt we will outline the process of ensuring that as the various design considerations are considered, South Africans need to form part of this process so that we can mobilize inputs from a number of people, various organized bodies, heritage, architectural bodies, and green building experts, and many other organized formations that can help us. And sometimes we do even get unsolicited advice from people that says, you know, when you rebuild this Parliament, look at this and this and this and this. Incorporate the rich tapestry of our cultures and tradition. Look at a building like that. So people send that, and some of them send it with a spice of humor. A building like this will do well. So yes, indeed, we'll have to consult quite widely, outline an elaborate process, including various bodies, various societies, Society for the Blind, Society for Physically Disabled, and various people that this Parliament must open up itself so that everybody can truly own and identify, even if it's about just restoration, to deal with the twin objective of building a Parliament that must truly embody the spirit of South Africanness, the uniqueness of what defines us as South Africans. So we will be able to outline that process. Asha, management of villages. Do we intend increasing the rentals? We don't know now, we're not managing that. But part of our work involves us assessing what we call facilities management. So our Parliament knows all its facilities. At this point, we don't have an immediate sense because we are not the landlord of all those facilities. So we are busy developing a facilities management diagnostic assessment so that we can be able to say, this is what we consider as an ideal facilities management. What we have done so far is to take a tour of the villages of members in Pelican, Laboria, and Acacia Park, just to do a diagnostic of what is obtaining around management, conditions, and so on. And we will be able to take that report forward to make sure that members are short of the work that is being done, and how do we work closely with Public Works to make sure that urgent issues of maintenance, urgent issues of allocation are managed better. We also know that there's legislation that's supposed to establish village management boards in these bodies. 1937 legislation, subsequently amended in 2007, placing members at the center of managing, almost like board of trustees and so on. So we've got to carefully examine those issues, as I said, in the examination of the legal framework, so that we reconcile those with the advent of the Financial Management of Parliament Act, the role of the administration of Parliament, and the role of members to perform oversight on what has to be done, and whether members actually doing the work and deciding would not compromise their own role of performing oversight on what is actually being done there. So those things will require us to have careful examination about those legislation and reconcile them with what is the expected responsibilities of members to perform oversight on any work that is supposed to be done in our environment. So I won't be able to talk about a rental amount now because we don't know. We are working with Public Works in terms of ensuring that Parliament villages are maintained and members are adequately treated. On the Section 194 process, I would ask my colleagues working on this, our Chief Legal Advisor, to look into this response and confirm what the process is, and our head of core business, they would complement each other to the extent that they might have true information that speaks to the cost of the evidence leaders around that. So Henry and Jason will speak on the savings, and Zureya and Rashida will speak on the Section 194.
Okay, there are those capable tables at the back. I don't know who will want to go first. The Chief Legal Advisor. I know that the information on the rates of the evidence leaders was previously made available to the media when they requested. I'm sure you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and good afternoon to everyone present. Lindsay, it is not so that we don't want to divulge the information relating to the fees. The arrangement is with all legal counsel that Parliament briefs them through the State Attorney. The State Attorney takes 6 to 12 months to invoice us, and we reimburse them for costs. So at this point, we don't have a consolidated amount that would give a fair reflection. But suffice it to say that the senior counsel earns 2,800 Rand a day, which is very low for a senior counsel. And the senior junior earns 2,500 or 2,600 a day. And I can say with some certainty that they've worked consistently virtually every day for the past year on this matter. So, yeah, that would be the sums. Thank you. I think to date we've paid them in the region of 4 million, and that would be to the State Attorney, but we don't have the final figures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Legal
Can you
Advisor.
just get the names and
The names of?
the officials that are answering the question?
Yes, the Chief Legal Advisor's name is Zoraya Adekari, Advocate Zoraya Adekari. Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Resida Berg is the Division Manager for Core Business Division.
Thank you and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for the question. Just to confirm that the arrangement with the State Attorney is also based on a negotiated rate that the State Attorney has with different counsel. So very often when Parliament procures these services, we get it at a reduced rate compared to what Council would normally charge standard clients via the State Attorney's Office. Because I'm one of the people that have to sign off on invoices, I can confirm that as at the end of March, we have signed off an estimated 4 million in fees, and it's for Council that's been assigned, and it's done work at intermittent levels for this particular committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've got a question of clarity.
Yes.
To Resida.
Okay. There is an instant follow-up to.
Hi,
Ms. Beck.
Resida. It's Andy Siwe from the chairperson of the PJ. So is it 4 million each for the 4 councils, or is it 4 million for all 4?
In total, yes. The mic has already left. You are saying in total?
End of March.
That's the total amount.
Sorry, to confirm, it's an estimated 4 million, and it's for all the council involved. And that is as at the end of March for invoices received to date. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. There was a question about the savings of virtual meetings versus physical. I don't know if whether there is Chief Finance Officer.
Thank you. Regarding the savings, we can't really give the rands and cents right now. However, as the Secretary has mentioned, the savings within the flights would be offset against the spending on our cell phones, 3G cards and laptops. However, we will look into that and provide some information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Chief Finance Officer is Mr. Jason O'Hara. Any other take from the management team regarding some of the questions? I think they are all covered. All right. Thank you very much. I don't see Chairperson of the PGA and the Secretary to Parliament any appetite for the third round. Correct me if I'm wrong. Before we go to the last item on the agenda, just to announce that there is a lunch that is arranged for 1 o'clock in the dining room for everyone. And I think we are almost there, 1 minute to 1 o'clock, so we are very much on time for lunch. So let me hand over to the Chairperson of the Press Gallery Association, Ms. Andisiwe Makinana, for the closing remarks, vote of thanks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Moloto. And STP, we are really pleased to hear that we still have a home in Parliament and that we are not going to lose our offices. We truly, truly appreciate that we have had this engagement, that you could avail yourself. And I understand that in the almost 30 years of a democratic parliament, this is the first time we have such an engagement outside Parliament in such a manner where we could be informed and get an opportunity to also ask questions to yourself. So we are truly grateful that you could find time in your, we understand, very busy schedule. There are just maybe 1 or 2 issues that I'll just, maybe more, there are more in-house issues that as people that work in Parliament on a daily basis that we encounter and that I would maybe appreciate if you'd look at. And also to say thank you to Parliament, because in the adjustments that had to be done due to COVID, the working from home and so on, Parliament also moved and started communicating with us online technologically. You know, every day we go to committee meetings before COVID and we fight with Parliament staff over documentation and so on. So now with COVID, everyone had to work from home and we're suddenly getting all this information. There's a WhatsApp group, it's like probably the biggest WhatsApp group in the country. And it's not limited to only to admins. And it's such a useful resource that we wish you could, even when you do go back to Parliament, keep, because we get information on time. It's 99% effective. Having said that, with committees now going back to Parliament, we know the issues of space. We know that the bigger committee rooms were affected by the fire. We will remain with smaller committee rooms. But we are already experiencing problems due to space. So I've been to a couple of meetings where in one meeting, we literally sat on the floor the whole time. In another meeting, we were told that you will have to stand if you're going to remain in this venue. And we can't be standing in a meeting for 4 or 5 hours as journalists. So as much as we understand that space is an issue, we would appeal to Parliament to remember us when you do your planning. Remember there's journalists that would need to be seated for us to perform our functions. And also, we do appreciate a lot that a lot of the meetings are still carried on Parliament communication platforms. That also assists us with, we don't have to go to Parliament because of the space issues. But we wish you could maybe improve on that side, because there's been instances where there's no link, or the link kept collapsing. In one SCOPA meeting, it collapsed the whole day, and we couldn't, follow what was going on. So those are like minor things that I would say they are in-house issues that we would like you to look at, so that we can also improve on how we do our work. But we do really appreciate the other things that you do for us, and the WhatsApp group has been amazing. It has improved communication from your side as well. It also helps us a lot with doing our work. Otherwise, that is all from us. Thank you so much. We hope this is not the last time we see you this year. Maybe we could do this again in December, and maybe more relaxed. Maybe we could host you. There's a bar in Parliament. We hope it's not affected by fire. And I'm just throwing out ideas. Otherwise, would really appreciate to have more of this with you, STP. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Like I said, I've already announced the lunch, because I don't want to say, you don't speak after the leadership has spoken. So thank you very much. The engagement is adjourned. Thank you.